If you want to translate your Flutter app for multiple languages, then I will show you how to easily implement a localization package and how to create such a language switch. At first, we add the Flutter localization to our pubspec XAML file. Then we set a generation flag to true. We need this because after we created our translation files, Flutter will generate Dart code that contains the translation and which we can reference in our code. The next step is to create 3 files. The first file is the l10n XAML file. It is located at the root of our project and it contains the path to our RRB files. The RRB files contain our translations. I will show them later. Then we need to specify which our template RRB file is. When we have multiple languages, we define one language as template language. In this case, English, and all the other languages need to contain less information, but I will show that later. Then we also define the name of our output localization file. This will be the file name that the generated Flutter file will have. And this generated Flutter file is the one that we reference in our code to get to the text elements. Now let's have a look at this RRB file. But before that, we have a look at the l10n Dart file, which lays in the same location. In the l10n Dart file, I defined all locals that we have. In this case, we have an English translation as base language and also a German translation. Now let's have a look at the RRB files. This is the English RRB file, and it always has this structure. For every text element, we define a name and we give it a description. We can add more parameters, for example, if you want to give a variable to the text file. An example of a variable is this one. Here we have an email placeholder saved successfully. So in this case, I just give the email variable to this text element and then it says the given email saved successfully. To make that work, we have to define its type. In this case, it's a string type. More about the structure and which variables you can use can be seen in the documentation of the l10n package for Flutter. I will link this in the description. So as we can see here, this is the template file and here we have the description. We need a description just in the template file, as we also have a German translation defined in the other RRB file. We do not need a description here. Also, for every other translation we will add, we don't need a description, so every other language can just look like this. One point to mention, which is very important for the RRB files, is the naming. Here we define the naming for the template file, and every other RRB file needs to contain the 2-character local for its language. Here you can see it's the app_en and app_de. The next step is to implement the text elements in the code. That's what our text element reference will look like. It's always the application of context, so this only works in a context when the widget tree is built. And after that, we add the name that we defined in our RRB file. So this T00117, a simple hero animation example, is the text element we called T00117 here. And for that text element we have the according translation in the German RRB file, and that's our German translation. The question here is, where does this reference come from? And for this reference we need to import a generated file. That's where we added the generate true parameter at the beginning, because this file lays in the .dart tool Flutter gen l10n folder, and this file has the name we also specified in our l10n XAML file. When we have a look at this, we can see that all our text elements are listed here in this generated file and reference to the app localization for German and for English. So with these files we can reference our text elements in the Dart code. Now before that works, we still need to add something in the main.dart file. In the root widget of our application, we need to add these parameters. The first one is the local, that's our initial local for the app. Then the supported locals, this is something I defined in the l10n.dart file. There we just reference this variable, which is a list of locals. Then we add the localization delegates. Information about these 4 delegates can be found in the documentation about the l10n package. Here at the local, I added my own logic to initially load the last language the user saved. So whenever the user changes the language from English to Germany or back or to another language, I save this information with a shared preference on this device. And whenever I start the app, I load this shared preference and directly show the app in the last set language. For the logic of saving and loading the last set language, I build an own repository. In this repository I have these 2 functions which are relevant here. One is to save the language. There I just open a shared preference and set a string with the current language name. And to load the language, I load the shared preference as well. And if there's no language saved, I wrote a function to get the system language. This just returns the set language on the device. And if there's also no language found on the device, which actually shouldn't happen, then I set a default language, which is English. For the last part of the tutorial, I want to show you how I built this language switch dropdown. Therefore, I just used the basic dropdown button from Flutter. In the localization repository, I saved the selected language and display it as current value. On the onChange method, I use the save selected language function I showed in the localization repository. And for all the possible values of this dropdown, so for all my languages I translated the app to, I created an enum field in my localization repository with all my languages. And I also added a function to get more information about this language. There I maintained a full name, a short name. If you want to expand this, for example with a flag, you can add another parameter here with a URL to a flag for each language. And then you have a drop-down button with a flag and the language name. All of this together builds the drop-down button we have here. If you don't want to build all of this by yourself, you can get the code for the complete app from getapppronto.com.